The unthinkable is happening. Let's go into the details of what has been discovered. This, well, with the European Southern Observatory, which has confirmed what it would be. Well, this invisible connection that exists between planets and galaxies, which at least helps us understand maybe what the universe truly is. Let's go into the details of what's happening on this topic. And well, first we have to look at the context. Who is Grinberg? And what does he mean by the topic of lattice? Although many people don't know about him, this man, this Mexican scientist, by the way, disappeared in a rather mysterious way. He has been a figure who continues to have influence worldwide in the field of quantum physics, in the field of the mind, and in other areas, which is Jacobo Grinberg's lattice. He said that physical reality is not the ultimate reality, that there is something underneath, let's say, the fundamental network of the universe. And that fundamental network is lattice. He claimed that there is an infinite mesh of information, a kind of matrix of energy and consciousness, that everything would be connected. That there is a kind of fabric, the basis of reality, but it's not matter, it's not objects, it's not time as we understand it, but rather a kind of pure field of information. And from that information come creations. From that information come thoughts, people who are fleeting in the universe. Esa idea como of Leonardo, like Jose, like Maria, like Gonzalez, like whoever, right? Like Astrid, like me. It's not the matter. It's not the matter. 1,000 years by the standards of the universe. So this is, then it's fleeting, but at the same time, existence from a timeless point of view, well, it's there. Is it constant or is it constant? No. Our past doesn't cease to exist, but rather it's there forever. So in a way, our existence is also, let's call it, quote unquote, eternal. It's not always there. And that's also another possibility in which the brain distorts that lattice, so to speak. And from that information, reality, as we perceive, it is born. But it's just a tiny piece of countless infinite realities, so to speak. We're getting close to the point, let's say, between science and metaphysics, but it's very interesting to give the context for what I'm about to say right now. We're going to move on now to the discovery part, so to speak. We see this neural interpretation of the world as very similar to what you find, for example, in what they call quantum mechanics, but also what they call philosophical idealism, among others. Your brain generates a neural field. That field interacts with the lattice, and that's where what we call reality is produced. That's incredible, because our consciousness would be beyond the brain. The brain is just like, imagine you're going to play a video game that your computer can't handle. So what happens with that video game? Well, then what do I need for the video game? Well, what do you need? Let's say it, a platform. No, let's call it an interface. So what's the interface called? Well, let's say it's called the Nintendo Wii, right? Or the Nintendo whichever one, right? PS5 or whichever one, just connect it to your computer and then to another device. Now you can see it on your computer monitors and play it and make a recording, whatever you want, right? Let's say something like that works. I mean, our brain is just that. So we are not our brain, right? That's the idea, isn't it? But rather, we use the brain to connect to a certain part of reality. It's an interface for this video game, so to speak, right? But our consciousness goes far beyond that, right? Jacobo Grinberg experimented with many things, including experimental telepathy, right? Grinberg conducted experiments where two people meditated together, were then separated and exposed to visual stimuli. And he claimed to detect brain activity that was related between the two, which he called transferred potential or transfer potential. Also, the case of Pachita, for example, a kind of shaman, so to speak, a psychic shaman, something like that, as she was called. Well, they called her Pachita, but her name was Barbara Guerrero. And she performed a kind of surgery without anesthesia and apparently without medical instruments, right? People who were close, like Grinberg himself or other individuals who have given their testimony about what they saw. They say it's astonishing. If all of this was just an illusion, then she was the best illusionist in the world because she would literally open people up and then heal them. She would take out some very strange things from them and then heal them. Well, so much so that people from the highest political level would go, but doctors would also go. When they couldn't cure their children, when the doctor said, I can't do anything else, I can't find a solution to save my child's life, who is very sick and medically it's not possible, they would visit Pachita and she would resolve their situation. So much so that the doctors would talk to their colleagues and to other doctors and say, hey, well, look, if you don't find a solution with medical treatment, then go to her. And I know it sounds absurd, it sounds strange, but for many minds, this just seems impossible. Grinberg believed that several minds could be synchronized and could function under neural fields. This would generate what they call a shared perception. He also proposed that enlightenment, basically the illumination of the mind or the brain of consciousness, also came through that connection with Lattice. Very close to what they use. For example, philosophies or styles of meditation like Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta or others, even some martial arts. He was partially inspired by Karl Piruam, and for him, memory and perception were something like holograms. Grinberg, he disappeared in 1994 without a trace. His body was never found. He was never found, and no one ever knew what happened to him. There are several theories that have been investigated and developed in various very good, very serious documentaries and reports in which they claim that the CIA took him, that they wanted him to experiment for them, that Mexican intelligence silenced him. Some also claim that he voluntarily went to Asia to meditate. At other levels, with very advanced people in those areas in South Asia. Another thing is that some even say he managed to transcend, that he found a way to transcend. We have to remember, I mean, getting into the mystical side of things, that great avatars, so to speak, spiritual leaders from other times reached that level where they transcended, where simplemente, according to what the legends say, so to speak, maybe the ancient myths, the person would reach such a high level of evolution that physically they wouldn't leave a body, but would simply transcend. That's another one of the theories out there, maybe one of the craziest ones if you want, but well, it's interesting at the end of the day. Now let's move on to what they discover in the filaments that connect galaxies, planets, and so on. Let's get into that. Notice that there's a discovery they make, that at least resembles some of the things that Jacobo Grinberg himself would have discovered or proposed, which is this kind of fabric of reality. The famous lattice of Grinberg. Astronomers have managed to directly observe cosmic filaments of gas and dark matter that connect two active galaxies called quasars, located at a distance of 3 million light years from each other. The discovery was possible after hundreds of hours of exposure using an instrument called MOOS from the Very Large Telescope, or VLT, at the European Southern Observatory, ASO. They would have detected a faint glow of ionized hydrogen, which, according to the results of this research, validates previous computational models that have been published in the scientific journal called Nature Astronomy. Yes, we would be witnessing the transition from theory to tangible evidence after decades. Standard cosmology proposed that the universe is not a void sprinkled with stars, but rather an organized structure similar to a neural network or a fiber optic network on a colossal scale. The same cosmic web, they claim, or what's fascinating about it, is that it would no longer be just a theory, but it would be fed through channels of gas. But even going to other levels, it would be shown that there is a certain type of connection. Yeah. At least proven now with these galaxies that are separated by 3 million light years. And you can check it out in the movie Hail Mary, because there's also a theme of connection between one place and another. Check out the movie if you can. According to what this neurophysiologist, Grinberg, who disappeared in 1994, reported, they talked about this web, and he proposed the existence of the lattice, which is what he said. It's an infinite matrix of energetic information, which somehow supports reality. I mean, it goes beyond the discovery of what this European Southern Observatory says. It's still kind of interesting. The idea is still the same, which is that there is a connection, like a neural network between galaxies and planets and all of this. A kind of wiring, an infrastructure of the cosmos. They describe it as a dynamic system where information and matter influence each other through channels that until just a few days ago were invisible and purely theoretical. Now, at least there's a connection that makes you say, hey, something is happening. There, you can see a connection, whether it's with gas or with something else. Well, we'll have to keep investigating and find out how prevalent these particles are. Right? That? And maybe someday we'll see or understand the universe in a completely different way, right? There have already been many in the past. Let's say at least they've proposed similar ideas where there is a kind of like a collective unconscious in which suddenly people or groups of people who aren't connected to another group start to reach certain conclusions that are very similar or even identical, in which they claim that it goes beyond being a coincidence, but that somehow there are certain types of connection. Beyond that, and beyond what can be said about Jacobo Grinberg, who I think is a very interesting person, and I think people are just starting to somewhat understand him. Let's see. You also ask how many Jacobo Grinbergs might be out there right now who are also making their own proposals and their own analyses on the topic of the relationship between consciousness with reality, right? With our human reality, so to speak, right? And also to acknowledge that yes, there have been studies and yes, there have been studies in very prestigious universities, but they have been very secretive, even sometimes related to intelligence agencies like the CIA itself. This situation is also now very well documented. That interest, which is now openly acknowledged, was denied for decades. No, we don't care about that. This doesn't exist. It's not happening. And now, with all these leaks and disclosures that have come out, it has been proven. It's been clearly proven that the agencies and governments had a very broad interest in this whole subject, right? Towards collective consciousness, towards mind control, towards all these matters, right? How do you see it, right? I mean, how do you see this situation now? All in all, it's all just an idea, right? That if Jacobo Grinberg gradually shows that what he proposed was this, I think these are separate things. Honestly, I think this discovery has more to do with the physical reality of gas particles and all that. And I think he was heading more toward a different reality, not visible in any sense, right? I see it more as another type of energy, right? Isn't it? He studied psychology and neurophysiology. He founded, by the way, the laboratory at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, specifically for research on all these topics. I mean, he was totally an academic, right? And I mean, among his 40 something books that he wrote, well, he explored a lot of the most strictly scientific side, but also along with that, there were already theories that seemed to go more toward the mystical side. Okay, what things might he have discovered? What things might he have imagined that he didn't get to write down? What? Because he had a very meticulous mind, very, very generous, in the sense that it gave him a lot to think about all those topics. And he also started connecting with other people, others who were also exploring the mind or practicing it, like in the case of Pachita, in a way that maybe they weren't aware of how they were doing it, but they were doing it. Who knows, right? Who knows where these parts will end up being understood in the future? I really hope that people keep researching these topics and that we stay interested in this. I think it will be interesting because that's a phase of human beings that I find really fascinating. Well, let's move on to other points. Let's go to other important matters and find out what happened to him. That would be super interesting, right? I mean, but anyway, we'll talk about this later. By the way, a lot of people who analyze the topic of Jacobo Grinberg has mentioned numerical consciousnesses and temporal patterns and the synchronicities that occur, although maybe not as evidence, but there is a lot of synchronicity in the cases he studied. And what about the things that happened with Grinberg? Very much in the style of Carl Jung, who is another very interesting figure that we should also talk about someday, right? In the relationship of the mind, but also of the things that are happening in the world right now. It's good. Very interesting, right? Now, let's move on to the comments. He managed to get out of the matrix, says Jack Draper. How have you been, Jack? He was on another level, honestly. Truly. Greetings. How have you been, Patry? He finds these topics interesting, but asks where are the pupils and those he left behind at the faculty he formed? Good point. Of course, that's how it is. And also a little because I've been able to talk about it with. And if you liked it, give it a like, share the video, share it. Even relatives I have who are completely focused on science in other areas, right? And I tell them, well, how much? I asked them this question because I already more or less know the answer, but I wanted to confirm it, right? I mean, how open is science to new things? I mean, if you discover something, will they actually accept it? Or the consensus with those I've been able to talk to always tell me the same thing. They say science is really difficult because to begin with, there's politics, there's bureaucracy, there's closed-mindedness, there's jealousy. So when you bring something new, okay, but first you have to coordinate it with someone who didn't study it, but someone who is above you. I mean, a scientist who is above you by age, by rank, whatever. Him, if they approve it, he will appear as a scientist who, along with you, developed this discovery, even though he hasn't done absolutely anything. His name will appear there because he's the one who will review it, and he's going to review it, and he's going to sign there. If they accept it, his name will appear as if he was also another scientist who contributed. So suddenly when we talk about this discovery, it will be like, so-and-so did it. Who knows, really? Unfortunately, many times it's not like that. Many times the second or third name that appears, there is the one who actually did all the work. And that's how you'll keep discovering things until one day you're the one at the top, right? And unfortunately, it's a lot of politics, a lot of bureaucracy, and a lot of closed-mindedness and all sorts of things. Let's suppose that a human being is discovered here or a human ancestor, but it doesn't fit the correct dates. Or let's say this would be a human being who would be earlier than all the other human beings. Ah, no, well, no, that's not wrong. I classify it as something that it is not. And if it weren't and they leave it out, then for that to be accepted, it would have to happen. Move heaven and earth, but they still probably won't accept it. So science has been aligning itself with what the consensus is, but that consensus can be expanded. Yes, but little by little. Yes. If there's a big discovery, we probably won't see it until much later. So if we ever get to see it, then wow. I mean, it's really hard to make progress. I mean, science has become a dogma in some way, unfortunately. So, well, obviously not all scientists think that way. Many, like Avilo, are trying to push things forward a bit. Jacobo Grinberg himself and some others, I mean, they want to move things forward. We are going to be the explorers, the ones who keep discovering the universe and everything, but we have to broaden our minds. We have to, well, it's like you're speaking Chinese to them. Well, not even Chinese, because many people already speak Chinese, maybe some other language, right? They mentioned the famous God particle. Greetings. See, how have you been, Miguel? He says, what happens is that the one who validates the theory is the one who makes it valid in the eyes of the scientific community and the world at large, says Miguel. How are you, Miguel? Greetings. Good point there, says Raquel. She says, good evening, my good communicator. Thank you very much. Greetings, Raquel. How have you been? Very good, Angel. How are you? Greetings. And the classic, right? There's a discovery and then the arguing, right? Whether the discovery is real or not. Well, I also understand, right, that there have to be certain protocols, that there have to be, okay, fine. I think that's very good. If those protocols work, I think that's correct. No, you know, the problem is that what I know, what they've told me is it works. I mean, it's more strictness. It's more of this. It's more very, very, well, I don't want to give too many details so I don't get anyone in trouble. But I mean, I'll give an example, just like separate from the realities they've told me about. But let's do you want to, are you discovering, right, a certain type of cosa en el espacio, right? In the, so you go and you have a space in the, see, the X telescope, no? We're going to go to an observatory in X country, right? Yes. If the person in charge, the head of the telescope agrees with the research, if he had time to read it, and he approves your request and he lends you the telescope, even if you have the approval of the owners or of the university that owns the telescope, the head there has to approve it first. Two. And if the head doesn't like the research or doesn't like you or whatever, he won't approve it and you won't get to see that telescope. You'll need to look elsewhere for it. And then you're out there looking for someone who'll give you the chance to open it. Or algo así. I mean, whether it's a discovery, just a tool, or a place for observation. I mean, let's suppose you're looking for something in an archaeological site or something like that. You're going to depend on a bunch of people and whether they like you or not. If they don't, you don't get through. And that's the end of it. Do it however you want. But that's how it is. Add that to everything. Medicine, anthropology, archaeology, whatever. Okay. No, I don't want to discourage you at all. What I'm saying is that we need to be critical about this and say, look, we need to demand clearer protocols, less bureaucracy. Yes, we need to be very serious and like, hey, look, there are a lot of discoveries and there's not enough time to review so many. We also need to be a little more open to ideas in that respect. I mean, look, there are things that maybe we can review, certain things that we can review with AI, like to speed up the process of reviewing so we can move on to the next phase. And so it doesn't end up like, I like you, I don't like you, or it doesn't fit the pattern of X discovery, because I also say, if we don't have protocols, then any scam, anything will also come out as reality, right? When we also have to consider that one thing is scientifically proven reality with its scientific method, and another thing is maybe a practical reality or a mystical reality. I mean, there are also other layers of division of these realities that aren't the same, but we can't understand them in the same way. How does that work? How, for example, even now, many people still see a lot of topics in psychology as if psychology is almost like witchcraft. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people see it that way. I say this because it's a field I was close to. I studied psychology, and it was a career that always caught my attention. I was interested in it. Even when I was 15 years old, I read more about psychology than about other things. I liked it. I really liked it. So my younger brother actually studied psychology too. Well, they're already finishing their degree, but what I'm getting at is that, well, it's something that for many, for example, for certain groups of psychiatrists, they see psychology as pure nonsense. No, they don't take the subject seriously, right? And no, I mean, maybe there are some psychologists who are more focused, but in general, they still see it that way because there are many things in psychology that you can't apply the scientific method to. So for that reason, it's like, no, well, that doesn't work. So it ends up in a weak middle ground for some who are very orthodox, right? They say, then take that part out. And that's difficult. Not everything fits the scientific method. And that's the problem. I don't know what happens when some things don't apply. Hard to prove, so to speak, right? I mean, but you can find an example. That's a classic one for me. And that's not something a psychologist does, a psychiatrist does. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, from Harvard. By the way, he came up with the idea of doing regressive hypnosis on a person and makes a mistake. And instead of telling him to go back to when he was 3 years old, he tells him to go to the origin of his problem, right? So he performs regression hypnosis. And instead of going to the origin of his problem within his normal life, let's say the person was 40 years old, well, something among he went back 3 or 4 lives. Let's say no. So the person said, no. Well, I'm in a cave, like in a cave that's making a cave in the mind, right? No, well, this is happening. We're here with my family. And who is your family? No, it doesn't have a name. It's more like an era, something really ancient or primitive, right? And it turns out that when the person comes out of that regression therapy, they followed up. They followed up. And when the person comes out of the therapy, they are cured of their fear of the dark. It turns out that supposedly they had died in another life in a cave, right? Obviously, the scientist at that time, the psychiatrist, said, this is nonsense, right? But he was very pleased that the person got better because they had tried everything and the person, let's say, got better. Because that's not the right term from what I understand. But let's say the person could live a normal life and could be in the dark without any problem, right? It's like they were cured. They fixed their problem, right? And then he said, this is really crazy. And so he started experimenting. And at some point, the psychiatrist ends up convincing himself that past lives exist, right? He says, but beyond that, beyond the fact that I can't prove it, I mean, I can't say, oh, look, here's the scientific evidence that past lives exist. I can't prove it. But what I can prove is that the therapy works. And well, there's no way not to help people, right? If I already saw that it works and it doesn't hurt anyone, well, hey, then use it, right? And so there are already people who do it, right? There are people who have used it and it works for them. Those kinds of things are already things. They're topics that go beyond just being tests, right? I mean, like, But if you tell me today they're gonna take away this fear, they're gonna remove this block you have, but it's gonna be through hypnosis, and I don't know what else, well, I'd sign up, right? No? I mean, if this isn't letting me live or has me blocked, if with this I can unlock my mind and find the origin of my problems, then bring it on, right? I mean, see it like a dream, see it like it's a game, mental or whatever, but in the end, you're going to feel relief from your problems. Well, it seems interesting to me at least, but suddenly it can also attract charlatans, obviously, right? Why? Well, because sometimes since it's not studied well, since the topic isn't deeply researched, and I think there are, from what I've seen, some very serious researchers on the subject, but there are also others who aren't so much, like with everything, right? Everything that's strange. But hay algunos que some misuse the topic and others do a good job. I mean, in the end, that's just how it is. So you have to stay sharp about that. But, well, that's another topic, right? Someone says we start to wonder what comes after life. and why the one who leaves doesn't come back to tell us about it. Patty says, greetings, Patrick. How have you been? The thing is that there are people who take risks. I mean, if you look at it that way, at the cases, I mean, there I would have written countries maybe more open to the topic, because here, well, in Mexico or among Hispanic, it's not a very open topic, although it's not as closed as in other places either. But for example, countries that are more open, like in India, there are cases. For example, there's a young girl who she lives with her family, and suddenly she remembers, hey, I was killed, but they killed me near here. What do you mean? Yes, they killed me here. Of course. They buried me here and did this to me. I don't know how. Since they believe in it, they investigate. They said, well, you have here a, how do you say, like a birthmark, right? So he said, yes, look, I know my family, my other mom, her name is this, her name is mom, all the information. So they go investigate and find that there is a family that had lost their daughter who had passed away, just as he described. And then they say, and it was so-and-so. So the police in India investigate this person, and it turns out that he confesses that it was indeed him. So a crime is solved because of a person, a girl, who says she remembered how they ended her life, right? In a recent past life, right? But in that case, it's not just one. There are a lot, and not just in India. There are cases in the United States, here in Mexico too. I mean, when we had Ruta Verde, the comment section in the community was awesome, because people would share amazing stories. And that's what they told me. Not someone from the community, but someone else, a neighbor from back then who found out about my channel. And she started watching it and said, hey, well, I have this story and here it goes. And amazed her son, who remembered who he was. Well, I'll tell you that story later, but it's a really crazy story, and she lived through it, right? I mean, and she's someone who wasn't very close to the mystery. That's a person who, out of nowhere, her son just shows her who he was. It's really crazy. I mean, her story is really something. And she wasn't, I don't know. I mean, it's not like she was a Buddhist or anything. No. I mean, the lady, she was just a normal woman, Christian or Catholic. I mean, it's just that what happened to her happened. And when she told me about it, wow, this is really something. It's a wild topic, but no, eventually he forgets everything and can't recall anything from the past. But well, as a mother, she saw the whole process of what he started to remember. And well, later on, I'll tell you the story later, so I don't spoil anything. So we'll talk about it, okay? I always thought that spirits could enter another body after going inside, says Eliseo. Saludos, Eliseo Adilson. Well, we already went to Ruta Verde, basically not today. But well, on the weekend, I don't think we can talk about other topics on the weekend. Well, let's move on to other matters. Let's go to other important topics where things are happening. La situación se está complicando. Now, in the world of news, the situation is getting complicated. Forget about that 3-day ceasefire that Russia and Ukraine had. The situation is getting more complicated. And well, let's get into that detail later. In about half an hour, 40 minutes, we'll be talking about one of the cases the FBI is working on. With this disclosure made by the United States, the Pentagon, FBI, and so on, there are several agencies. They have to reveal some information. There's a particular case I'm going to talk about, and we'll try to cover at least one case a day and share it here, right? All right, let's move on to other important matters. I'll see you in another minute or two. If you want to join us and you're here, well, now that you're connected, just head over to the next live stream and we'll keep talking there. Sounds great.